From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, everyone. If you all could find a seat, that would be terrific. I want to welcome you today. I'm Betsy Peterson. I'm the director of the American Folklife Center here at the Library of Congress, and I want to welcome you to the latest in our Benjamin Botkin lecture series. A word about the Botkin series: it is a strategy that allows us to present the very best and latest of scholarship from leading scholars in folklore, ethnomusicology, oral history, and cultural studies. It also forms a part of our acquisition strategy. All of the lectures that are a part of the Botkin series are videotaped and will later be webcast on our website so that individuals from throughout the world and in future generations can hear the wonderful work of all of these scholars. And so with that said, I just want to ask you, if you haven't turned off your cell phone, to please do so, or you will be in our archive. And so today I have the honor of introducing the distinguished British folklorist Ian Russell, who is currently the director of the Elphinstone Institute at the University of Aberdeen in Aberdeen, Scotland. For the past 40 years, Professor Russell has conducted extensive field work in folk song, traditional drama, folk dance, and traditional humor in Northern England, particularly in the counties of Yorkshire and Derbyshire, as well as on traditional music, song, dance, crafts, and celebrations in northeastern Scotland. His field work has resulted in an impressive number of publications, too numerous to mention here, but we will be hearing about one of them later in a moment. He has also been awarded a gold badge from the English Folk Dance and Song Society, the Society's highest honor, and the Harold Kootlake Research Medal from the British Folklore Society, whose journal, Folk Music Journal, he edited from 1980 to 1993. Professor Russell has also organized and directed seminal events, such as the annual traditional singing weekends at Killarney, Scotland, the influential North Atlantic Fiddle Conventions, the popular annual traditional storytelling weekends at Wood End Barn, Banchory, and the Free Reed Convention. Among other professional activities, he is also a member of the editorial board of Folk Music Journal, a member of the executive committees of the UK's Folklore Society and the European Seminar in Ethnomusicology. He is also a board member of Scottish Culture and Traditions Associations, the Traditional Music Forum in Scotland, and the HNet Network on Folklore, Humanities, and Social Sciences Online. A busy scholar indeed. If there is one area of research with which Professor Russell is most closely identified, it might very well be the distinctive village carol tradition practiced in the Pennine Hills of North England. His carol research, which includes over 1,000 hours of field recordings and hundreds of manuscripts, is currently being organized into a major archive called Village Carols. Copies of his recordings, which have been placed in the British Library Sound Archive, have resulted in 17 Village Carols publications, including books, 4 carol collections, and various CDs, also including a Smithsonian Folkways CD entitled English Village Carols. His most recent book, the Derbyshire Book of Village Carols, was published in 2012. Since 1994, Professor Russell, who, as you can imagine, is himself an excellent musician, has also directed the highly successful biennial festivals of village carols at Sheffield, England. Today, in contemporary America, as well as the UK, Christmas carols have been largely homogenized in form and performance style. But as we are about to hear, this was not always the case. Please join me in welcoming Professor Russell for his presentation on the Hidden Carols, a Christmas singing tradition in the English Pennines. Professor Russell?
Hi everyone, great to see you. I want you to know that yes, it is the same shirt. It's the only one I own, but it is washed and ironed, thanks to Norma. The glasses, though, are very different. I've got new eyes, you know. You can have them taken out, eyes these days, and new ones put in. You must try it. It's really amazing. I can now see better than I could at 4 years of age. Can you believe? It's true. Yeah. Okay. Now, in this lecture, I'll give a short introduction and brief setting of the vernacular Christmas carolling tradition that flourishes in village communities near the industrial city of Sheffield in the Pennine Hills of South Yorkshire. I'll consider the principal roles within the tradition and some of the dynamics that have characterised its development, and I'll discuss participatory performance and the nature of part singing and attempt to identify what makes this sound so distinctive. Why then have I chosen to describe these carols as hidden? The official history and evolution of post-Reformation carolling in England is problematic for several reasons. In the first place, the principal scholarly accounts, for example Eric Routley, conveniently overlook a body of evidence from the 19th and early 20th centuries because it didn't fit in with the author's ideology or agenda. In the second place, the commentators passed judgment on aesthetic grounds that the music was unworthy of serious consideration. They elevated the discourse on Christmas carols to an elitist level that ignored evidence from the grassroots and was not based on ethnographic data. This situation was further exacerbated by the publication of authoritative collections of Christmas carols, which restricted their contents to reflect this position. And here we're talking about Husk 1868, Chope 1875, Bramley and Stainer 1878, and there are others as well. Following the discoveries of the early folk song pioneers, the carol collections were widened, but stopped well short of including any reference to the vernacular carolling sung in parts. And here we're referring to 1928, the Oxford Book of Carols, Dearmer, Vaughan Williams and Shaw. Although the early folk song collectors encountered such vernacular carolling traditions, they chose to exclude them as they considered them outside their brief. And here two classic examples would be Cecil Sharp and the aforementioned Ralph Vaughan Williams. This is unsurprising as they preferred to focus on an earlier form of carolling, monodic, that's solo voice, performed in a ballad-like style with a narrative structure. Unlike field workers in the USA, and of course the classic example is George Pullen Jackson in the 1930s, they could not accept group performance and the singing in parts as admissible to their folk song canon. Moreover, they believed that folk song should be anonymous, and in the case of many of these vernacular carols, this was demonstrably not the case. Hence, in their role as gatekeepers, the early folk song collectors left a significant element of vernacular musical tradition in England unrecorded, undocumented, and under-researched. For the promoters of the post-World War II folk song revival movement, and here we're referring particularly to Peter Kennedy, A.L. Lloyd, Bert Lloyd, Ewan MacColl, Peggy Seeger, the English village carolling tradition lacked the essential folk qualities, and by that they were referring to authenticity and purity. And for musicologists, especially scholars of hymnody and psalmody, the tradition fell short in terms of musical good taste, and it was castigated for failing to conform to Western classical rudiments of music, which actually largely postdate it, and thus it remained hidden as far as the official record was concerned. Now I'm going to whiz through a brief history of how this carolling came into being, and the reason I'm whizzing through it is there is so much to say about it in the contemporary context. So this is a summary of the key points. So there was a dearth of congregational singing in the English parish churches in the 16 and 1700s, and this was the result of Puritanism. In fact, the Puritans actually banned Christmas carols. You can't believe for a minute that people took much notice, but they did ban them. This dearth became transformed in the mid-1700s by a grassroots movement of composition of hymn and psalm tunes. And we're talking about, in official places of worship, people making the music to create a whole vigour and a whole scene of dynamic change. And these people that were doing the creation, they weren't your establishment figures at all. They were shoemakers, they were blacksmiths, they were tailors, they were artisans. And they were people in many cases who were highly musical but had no formal musical training. Now, their compositions they were creating were polyphonic in sound and featured fuguing sections and melismata. Now, melismata is where you sing more than one note to a syllable, and fuguing is where the different parts come in different times. And of course, this is, as you might expect, the result of the influence of Bach and Handel and the Baroque movement in general. Actually, I think you say broke, don't you? That's a good term, isn't it? It rhymes with folk as well. I found that out. The music was performed by bands of church musicians. Now, I'm just going to whiz through. Let's just see if I can get to slide 21 very quickly, because I didn't want to alter the position. But there's such a band of musicians. That's 1906, quite late. They're no longer in church, and we'll come back to that and talk about that later. But that's the sort of ensemble we're talking about. Church interiors were modified to accommodate the performance of these groups, who were known as choirs with a QU. And their galleries were erected in the west end of churches, hence the expression facing the music. You turned away from the priest and you faced the music, and in so doing turned your back on the priest. The heyday of this musical efflorescence was approximately 1760 to 1820. Church hierarchies from the early 19th century considered the music to be profane, frivolous, and undermining of authority. From the 1820s onwards, under the influence of high church reformers known as Tractarians and later referred to as the Oxford movement, the music became subject to formal disapproval. The choirs were literally sacked, and the instruments' place was taken by organs, and later choirs were reintroduced into churches, and these choirs were little boys in cassocks and surplice looking just like cathedral choristers. By the time the publication of the first mass-produced hymn book, and here we're talking about hymns, ancient and modern, 1861, this music had virtually been wiped out of English parish churches as if it had never existed. However, the singers and instrumentalists didn't stop performing this type of music. Oh no, they loved it. They had great affection for it, and they identified with it. And they took it with them into the newly opened nonconformist chapels. And it was sort of welcome there for a bit, and that's until they got completely swamped with American influences such as Moody and Sankey, but we won't get too distracted by that. But the more to the point, they kept it dear to their hearts, and it wasn't at that point it was united with Christmas music, but because it had always been part of Christmas music since it had been created. But it was in this one place, Christmas, in this one context, that it became conserved, as it were, celebrated and taken forward. And it took its place as part of village perambulations. Perambulation is not where you wheel a pram round. Perambulations is you walk round and you stop off at different places to do a custom or sing a song or whatever. Now, the music of the of this Christmas festivities developed largely into an oral tradition. There were plenty of written records, plenty of manuscripts particularly, but it was in fact largely oral and tradition. And you can prove this 1,000 times over just by comparing the version of this particular carol sung with the same carol in another place and hear how different their carols are. And we'll do that in a minute. We'll do just that. Partly as a result of the social disjuncture of 2 world wars and the consequent loss of life, carolling became largely confined to 2 main regions. And here, the region we're talking about, the Pennines of Derbyshire and South Yorkshire, and parts of the southwest of England, notably Cornwall and Somerset. And here's a map of the Sheffield area. I don't expect you to know this unless you've done a survey of pubs. But I have. Anyway, you can see Sheffield quite clearly there, big conglomeration, over 1 million people. And all these areas, villages alongside them, highlighted in yellow. In fact, they're right on the outskirts of the city now. In some cases, they're in the city, but previously they had been isolated villages outside the city. And the main performance then shifted away from the official places of worship into the street and into the local village pubs. Such carol singing became outside the control of the official places of worship, consequently largely secularized. Moreover, its performers were not necessarily regular church or chapel goers. Thus, the singing of carols and formal Christian worship were largely separated. Carolling in pubs was, and is, primarily festive, seasonal, unrestrained, emphasizing sociability and conviviality, whereas sacred singing in church was and is reverential, deferential, controlled, focusing on worship and prayer. Interestingly, the notions of heritage and conservation are not primary motives for the carolers, who think instead of obligation to the group and loyalty to the session, coupled with a desire to participate wholeheartedly in and enjoy the singing. Emphasis is placed on those aspects that distinguish it from formal carol singing in church, such that there is loudness rather than softness, earthiness rather than sweetness, singing competitiveness rather than blending, vocal attack rather than mannered phrasing. Sounds like homicide, doesn't it? Diversity rather than conformity. The importance of the oral tradition rather than the primacy of the text. The blurring of gender conventions rather than the strict adherence. And here we're talking about the allocation of parts in modern singing conventions, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Humorous spontaneity rather than sacred dogma, alcoholic indulgence rather than abstinence, and social levelling rather than formal hierarchies. And the best thing is to go straight to the pub. So here we are in the pub, and the pub in question is the Royal Hotel Dungworth. And you can see from those photographs just how busy that pub is. Now, each pub has its particular season for carolling. They're not all the same. One such, the Royal, starts on the 11th of November. That's Armistice Day, an insignificant day marking the end of the First World War, and finishes on the Sunday after Christmas Day. And thus it makes 7 Sundays, with an additional session on what we call Boxing Day, St. Stephen's Day, the 26th of December. The session takes place at lunchtime, starting promptly at midday and finishing at 2 o'clock. Although actually the carolling usually continues after the finish, and it follows a pattern. There are carols that fit in the after the finish session, and that lasts for about half an hour. By the commencement of the singing, the pub is full to capacity, and we're talking about a pub that can hold probably about 50, 60 people, having 80 to 100 people in the pub. So it's pretty full. For the past 20 years, the carols have been led by the accompanist Sue Heritage, who plays an electronic organ with the support from a small number of senior carolers who cluster around the organ. Although Sue does not actually sing, she selects the repertoire. the order, the pitch, and influences the tempo. Drawing on musical scores, both printed and manuscript, she plays an introduction which immediately signals to the carolers her choice, and the pub is brought to order, such that talking stops. No one says, "Everyone quiet, we're going to start." This is all done automatically and naturally. Most of the carols are 4-line metrical stanzas in common ballad metre. So the classic example is "While shepherds watch their flocks by night, or seated on the ground, the angel of the Lord came down, and glory shone around." So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Or in short metre, "Hark, hark, what news those angels bring, glad tidings of a newborn king, born of a maid, a virgin pure, born without sin, from guilt secure." 4, 4, 4. But in fact, some of these texts are in fact sung to several tunes. So in the Royal at Dungworth, you might hear "While Shepherds" sung 4, maybe 5 times, and that's not unusual. There are some sessions where maybe as many as 7 renditions of "While Shepherds" are the norm, and maybe 2 or 3 settings of "Hark, hark, what news," those 2 carols I recited then. In performance, these texts become complex. They become complex through the use of repetitions and through the use of the different entries of the parts. And we're going to listen now to a carol from the Royal Hotel Dungworth, a carol known as Pentonville, a setting for "While Shepherds Watched." And fingers crossed, if my little cursor will click on the sound, we'll see. So Sue brings everyone in. An interlude, which we'll talk about in a minute. Hear how quiet the pub is. And away they go into the second verse. And we'll leave them there. Between each verse of the carols, as you've just heard, Sue adopts the custom of playing a short musical passage or interlude, and this has a formal name in music. It's known as a symphony. Such interludes were originally developed as an opportunity for instrumentalists, such as the one I showed you a photograph of, usually string or woodwind ensembles, to demonstrate their virtuosity. Nowadays, in the pubs, the symphonies allow the singers to have a rest, to take refreshment, to re-establish pitch and tonality, to relish the ingenuity of the accompanist, and enjoy the musicality of the passage, both in terms of originality and familiarity. Such symphonies may simply restate the first or last line of the tune, or they may provide a reworking or variation of the tune, or in some elaborate cases encapsulate a different melodic theme which may complement or contrast with the tune of the carol. Sue interprets such symphonies with a measure of freedom by employing syncopation and by playing them up-tempo, but her style is actually in contrast to several of the other accompanists, such as Barbara Needham at the Traveller's Rest in Oughtibridge or Julia Bishop at the Blue Ball in Worrall, both of whom play the symphonies in strict time. And we're going to hear now an example. We'll wait for a minute. We'll talk about the unaccompanied session. So here some pictures of the Black Bull in Ecclesfield. We'll also talk about the Crown and Glove in Stannington and the George at Upper Denby. Here the singing is a cappella. The leader is responsible for both the choice and order of the carols and for pitching them. This is particularly crucial as he does so without reference to any external source. So just a quick look now. Here we are in the Crown and Glove at Stannington. The name used for such a role for the person who strikes up the carol is striker, quite literally, a striker, one who strikes up a carol, which probably derives from the striking ping of a tuning fork. Another term used is the pitcher, which one who gives the pitch, which similarly suggests the blowing of a pitch pipe. In fact, both methods were in use in the early church choirs mentioned above. However, such aids are rarely used in the pubs today, and certainly not in the three mentioned above. If the leader is unsure of a pitch, he may check out his proposed pitch with a fellow caroller, who is similarly experienced, as often happens with Des Child at the Black Bull in Ecclesfield or Barry Bridgewater at the George in Denby, Upper Denby. Very occasionally, an inappropriate pitch will lead to subsequent censure in the form of a humorous riposte or jibe. We had our bellies to the floor then. That's what Billy Mills used to say when the pitch was too low. Or if typically gasps of desperation if the pitch is too high, and comments such as "we were up with the angels then." Very exceptionally, a striker will stop the carol after the first line or two, repitch and start again. The ability to pitch a carol successfully and appropriately is considered to be the mark of an accomplished caroller. And here we're going to hear some a cappella singing from the Black Bull. The carol is the one I recited to the words to you, the text, "Hark, hark, what news?" Basses and the trebles. Now the parts break apart. Virgin, you can join in, honestly. No symphony, straight on. Okay, so we could hear quite clearly there the two major singing parts, the bass part and the treble part. And the treble part is regarded to be the tune. That would be the equivalent, obviously, to soprano or treble. And those are not gender-specific parts. There are women who sing with the basses, and there are women and men who sing with the tune as well. Interesting the way they started up. We started up with everyone sort of not quite coming in at the same time. Everybody sort of came in when they knew what had started and recognised it. And this sort of way of beginning, sometimes people can't hear what the carol that started and they listen through it and then they hear and then they're in. And that's the way it is in these sessions. No one says, shut up please, we're all going to sing this. It's far more sort of informal in its character. But the parts have different names, and two of the parts that are referred to, the tune and the bass, are often called firsts and seconds, and the reasoning is quite obvious, isn't it? Because when they break apart into the fuguing session, then the tune singers go first and the bass singers go second. But in fact there are exceptions to this rule, and here we're going to hear some singing of a carol called Foster, another setting of Wild Shepherds. I'm trying not to confuse you too much. Another setting of Wild Shepherds Watch Their Flocks, from Upper Denby, and here the beginning here is beautifully clear. Actually, they're really on the ball here. Barry Bridgewater brings them in, and then everyone immediately on the ball.
Wild shepherds walk
Notice what a different sound it has to the black bull. There's the basses going first. In come the trebles. Basses again. Trebles. Notice how the phrasing, very expansive. And we'll leave them there. The experience of singing in the Royal or the Blue Ball or the George is often described as extraordinary, especially by first-time listeners or people who are just beginning to learn the carols. The magnitude and intensity of the volume of male-dominated voices is almost overwhelming. I've heard fellow carolers comment to me that their eardrums were popping, that they could feel the sound vibrating through their bodies, and they felt the air in the room bubbling with the overload of volume. I don't know if any of you have been inside an ocarina, but I would imagine it's something similar. The declamatory nature of the singing is such that it's often impossible to hear your own voice, let alone hear the person next to you or someone talking in your ear. And we're going to hear a little bit more about the singing style later on, but here we're going to the same carol. This time it's called Old Foster, not called Foster, but same carol, and also a setting of wild shepherds, but a different venue. This is the Blue Ballinn, the organist is Julia Bishop, and a very different style of presentation. Introduction. We're not hearing all the introduction, we're just hearing a bit of it. Here's the symphony. It's a busy pub. There are other rooms. In the room where we're singing, everyone is quiet, but the sounds are coming from other rooms. Way into the second verse there. 4 verses are sung of Wild Shepherds Watched in that pub, and by the time they've got to the end of the 4th verse, the whole carol will have lasted approximately 6 minutes, so it's not something that's over in a flash, far from it. I don't know if you're listening, but you can hear individual voices. This is the difference between choir singing and this sort of singing. When you hear a choir sing, the last thing that any choir leader wants you to hear is an individual voice. They want the choir to sing as an individual voice. But here we can hear individual voices, can't we? We can hear some people singing absolutely true to pitch and other people singing a bit wayward from the pitch. We have what's called broad tuning, and this is quite common. Don't mock. If we were all to strike up Wild Shepherds and watch now, I'm sure we would have broad tuning, I can promise you. But no, it's the way people participate, and it's the way ordinary people participate as opposed to trained choirs, of course. It's a shared endeavour, and there is a growing atmosphere of excitement. A momentum is built up by the sheer number of voices. We talk about social synchrony, and we talk about it leading to something where your feet hardly touch the ground. Flow, the term we use in ethnomusicology for this state. And the resulting euphoria is given expression by the repeated singing of the last line or section of a carol, such as in the carol Mount Moriah, which we're going to hear in a minute or two. And we're going to hear that they don't want to finish this carol. This carol is so good they don't want to finish, so they keep repeating the end of it. And there's a picture of the Traveller's Rest, and there's Barbara at the piano, Roy in the blue shirt who leads the singing. You can see how people take photographs, how the age groups are mixed, how the gender is mixed, how we're next to the bar. You can even see my wife Norma there, but we won't talk about that. Right. Right, there we are. So this is called Mount Moriah. The words are Glory to God. So it's the last verse. This isn't the first verse, this is the last verse. Bass is singing first again. So they're repeating now, they're repeating that last phrase, that last section. And repeating it again. They don't want to stop. There's a little signal which I'm sure is used elsewhere where they go like that. Yeah, they might sing that last section as many as 5 or 6 times, depending on how sort of animated and excited they are. Some of the characteristics that distinguish the carol singer's performance include unconsciously sliding between certain notes and adding passing notes and vocal embellishments. And here I'll just demonstrate what I mean. At Jacob's well a stranger sought. That's the bare melody. When it's sung in tradition, it becomes at Jacob's well a stranger sought. Got 3 different sorts of ornamentation. We've got the slide into the notes. At Jake, the ornament. Well, a stranger, and we've got an anticipation. Stranger sought, leaping onto the note before it's actually arrived, if you understand. Some of the in the speech we hear local dialect, and we hear this particularly in contrast to received pronunciation. Choirs are trained to sing in what in the UK we call received punctuation, BBC English perhaps it might be described as. But in the pubs they sing, of course, in their vernacular dialects, and we have the vowels breaking apart, the vowel diphthongs breaking apart, so we end up with words like pure having 2 syllables, fia having 2 syllables, secure having 3 syllables. Although there's a clear understanding and agreement in respect of the form of the tune part, this is not necessarily the case with the bass line, such that 2 bass singers, myself and Gordon, for example, standing next to each other, we sing differently. We don't actually sing. We've been singing side by side for 30 years, but we don't sing the same. We sing our own version of the bass line. And if you checked out with 20 other basses in the room, this would similarly be true. And it's particularly noticeable outside the fuguing sections. Now we're looking at a manuscript now, and the reason we're looking at a manuscript is because I wanted to talk to you about singing parts. Here's quite an early manuscript for the carols. We do have manuscripts going back into the 1750s, 1740s, but in the Sheffield area this is one of the earliest ones I've come across in the 1820s. And here you can see, those of you who are aware of how music works, there is only one line on the top and only one line on the bottom. So we've actually got in both those carols just two singing parts. So when people sing the carols these days in two singing parts, they're doing nothing different than was done all those years ago. But there were other carols that were set in more than two parts. There were carols that were set in 3 parts or 4 parts. But just because they were set in 4 parts, which is the standard form of choral singing today in the Western world, that doesn't mean to say that those 4 parts were the same as we have today. So, for example, when Old Foster was in fact put into print in about 1814, the carol we heard, not as a carol, it was just put into print as a psalm tune. It in fact was the line-up of the parts was the tune part sung by men singing the bass part, and a women's part called a counter singing above the men, and just those 3 parts. And when we listen to the 2 versions of Foster that we did hear from Denby, from Upper Denby, the George, and from the Blue Ball in Worrall, we're hearing variation, and often there's an explanation for those variations. When at the Upper Denby they're saying, "While shepherds watch their flocks by night," they're actually picking on the counter line. They've adopted the counter line as their tune at that point, whereas the ones in the Blue Ball in Worrall were singing, "While shepherds watch their flocks by night." They were going with the part that John Foster intended to be the male dominated tune singing. Modern printings of these carols have occurred since about the 1880s, and they're very localized productions, maybe only for 2 or 3 villages, and they are nearly all put into standard 4-part harmony, regardless of what people are singing out in the actual field. When we listen to the carol singing today, we do hear quite clearly, obviously, the tune and the bass. Sometimes we hear tenors as well. It's quite common, but the one part you're not really aware of, and if it is there, and it usually isn't, is an alto part. I'm going to talk a little bit now about positioning and layout of carolling in the pubs. And we saw some of those photographs earlier. We just go back to one of them just to give you the feel of it, where in fact we do have an instrument or a striker. Often the furniture in the room is removed. So if we go all the way back to the Royal Hotel in Dungworth, there we are, the Royal Hotel, the furniture is removed, all the stools, there are just some tables in and the bench seats, and people tend to focus. You can see in the photograph in the top left where Sue, the organist's head, is just there and everyone's facing towards her. You can see in this photograph here from the Ecclesfield where people are sitting round tables. It's different. People are facing in different directions. I don't have a photograph to show you of the George at Denby, but there most people stand and they all face. So you get 2 configurations here. The one configuration very focused, and the other configuration comparatively random, and with the voices projecting in different ways, and it gives a whole different feel and sound to the room. Formal hierarchies don't exist in the carol sessions, but informal ones do. And sometimes you can tell by how near somebody stands to the organ, the instrument. Or sometimes maybe in the Black Bull in Ecclesfield, for example, there is a table and people say, "Oh, that's top table, that's top table." It's where the senior carols go. It's where the man who is the striker in this photograph, bottom left, Des Childs, is striking up a carol there, as we can see. A little bit about solo singing. There is solo singing in the pubs. If we talk about the Blue Ball at Worrall, we're in a pub where they have a 2-hour carol session. A 2-hour carol session, and during that 2-hour carol session they really go for it. The gaps between the carols might only be a minute, 2 minutes at most, just long enough for people to sort of stretch their legs and just maybe have a word or two with the people either side, and then the introduction starts for the next carol. So sometimes 22, 24 carols are sung in a session. Of those 22, 24 carols, maybe 5 are solo carols. Now, these carols are quite curious because we wouldn't recognise a lot of them as carols. Let's just go through the list that they sing at the Blue Ball at Worrall. The mistletoe hung on the old castle wall, and the holly branch shone in the old oak hall. It's a song, it's a parlour ballad, it's called The Mistletoe Bough, dating from the 1830s, and it's a declamatory thing. It's got some Gothic horror in it, but it's certainly nothing to do with the Nativity. We've got the next carol that might be sung solo at the Blue Ball would be a carol which is called The Christmas Tree. In its origins, it came from the US. It came from the pen of a man called William Bradbury, a very well-known evangelist and hymn writer, and he wrote lots of things for Sunday schools, and this was one of them. And I think he published it under the title of Santa Claus's Man, who comes this way so blithe and gay upon this merry Christmas day. And we'll hear a rendition of that in a little while. A nostalgic song. I'll sing you a song that is dear to my heart, of a place where I always would dwell, and if you will kindly lend me your ears, a few of its beauties I'll tell. That beautiful dale, home of the swale, how well do I love thee, how well do I love thee, beautiful dale, home of the swale, beautiful, beautiful dale. Swale is a river. We had a very good friend who for 15 years was quite convinced there was a form of wildlife there called swales, but no. Swale is a river in North Yorkshire. But there we are, absolutely nothing to do with Christmas, but very much a part of the carolling and considered to be a carol. 2 modern carols, I call them modern because they're more modern than the ones we've been talking about. One written by a vicar or a vicar's son, the Vicar of Ecclesfield, a song for the time when the sweet bells chime. Now that is about Christmas. Another one, Stannington, written by Mrs. Dyson, Mina Dyson. We met Mina in her later years in the 1970s, early 70s, and Mina wrote this carol called Sing All Ye People of the World Earth Today. Sing All Ye People of the Earth Today. But they all have one element in common, and that is they are solo and chorus. The solo is sung, and then people join in all together. And one difference also is they're applauded, whereas the carols, generally speaking, it's very unusual for anyone to clap at the end of a carol, because I suppose there is no such thing as an audience. Everyone is a participant. So we'll hear now John Colley singing The Christmas Tree. We'll just get there. Here we are. And John, his father, Doug, sang The Christmas Tree in the same pub. Whoops. And his grandfather was a member of that group who we saw the photograph, the itinerant musicians. So he has a very long line, as it were, of pedigree in the carolling. John Colley.
Santa Claus
symphony. See how it similarities with the other carols. And away goes John into the next verse. And notice his declamatory, punchy style of singing. It's really quite marked. And that is sort of sums up the way that most of the carolers sing when they're performing all together. We're going to talk a little bit about the dynamics of stability and change over the past 40 years. And I've been very privileged, of course, to be able to go back that far and to be able to compare recordings and be able to compare in my notes of the different carolling sessions. And here I'm particularly going to focus on context, repertoire and style, and just pick out a few things to illustrate it. For example, the carolling in the pubs where the singing is practised is considerably stronger today than it was in 1970, but the number of pubs in terms of singing venues has been reduced significantly. Whereas the repertoire of the region as a whole is much the same, with one or two additions and one or two losses within individual venues, new carols have been learnt. Where have these new carols come from? Well, they've come from neighbouring sessions. They have pinched other people's carols. That's how they've done it. And the resulting effect has been that individual repertoires have grown. So whereas in the Black Bull in Ecclesfield, when we first went, they might have had 20, 22 active carols in their repertoire, they now have 30, maybe even as many as 36 active carols. Occasionally people compose new carols, they're tried out, and it's very hard out there, and these carols often disappear after 1 year and maybe after one or two singings. In terms of style of performance, a simple example within the village of Stannington will make a point. In 1970, I recorded a cappella singing in the Peacock, a pub, and there they were performing the carols at an average tempo between 80 and 90 beats per minute. And those of you who know about music, that's a pretty slow beat. But during Christmas 2012, the carolling now in the Crown and Glove, where we saw the photographs of a minute or two ago, there they were singing the carols in the range of 110 to 120 beats per minute. A similar trend has been observed in other parts of South Yorkshire, and another noticeable difference over this period is the growth in part singing. The part singing now is much stronger than it used to be. But let's listen to the singing in the Peacock. So this is 1970. So I missed the opening. There's only about 15 people singing. Not 30, 40, 100. Very steady. This is the same carol we heard a little while ago. We'll talk a little bit about humour, and humour is a very important part of the carols for various reasons. It helps to make carolling sessions less intense and to relieve the build-up of tension. Some humorous interchanges are actually repeated every week in almost ritualistic dimensions. There's a carol called Jacob's Well, and everyone always says, oh, we're always glad to hear Jacob's Well. A case in point concerns the need to operate a pub effectively. So at the Royal at Dungworth, the bar staff cannot retrieve the glasses. They just can't get into the tables. And so they ask the carolers to pass their glasses over across the bar so they can be washed up, obviously, and reused. Well, immediately that results in the striking up of a musical reply, in parody, as it were. So the tune is Come Rhondda, Bread of Heaven, pass your glasses, pass your glasses, pass your glasses to the bar. Reply, fill them up again, fill them up again, fill them up with decent ale. Twist, that's impossible, that's impossible, that's impossible to do. At the Blue Ball in Worrall, they might say, try the shoulder, try the shoulder. That's another pub in the village, up the road. But anyway, so here we have, it has the desired effect. All the glasses get back to the bar. They just keep adding. You notice that people, not everyone's singing, you know, some people are talking. That's because they obviously realise and they're switched on to the fact that this is a bit of a joke. In Ecclesfield, there was a lovely carol which was Jesus, you lover of my soul. Another version, actually, of Bread of Heaven, another setting, not the same words, but featuring a chorus, Bread of Heaven, Bread of Heaven, another setting of those words. Now, in that carol, Ike used to get so animated that he's the leader of the carols. He actually stood up, which was extraordinary, but he did. And he would conduct, he'd swoop over everybody with a hand, and very much aware of his ironic vulnerability. And at the end of it, everyone would sing, sit down, you foil, sit down, you foil, sit down, you foil, sit down. Foil is fool. Sit down, you foil, sit down, you foil, sit down, you foil, sit down. Once again, borrowing a well-known tune, of course, Old Lang Syne. The composition of the participants at the main carol sessions in the pubs over the past 40 years demonstrates a marked trend. In the 1970s, when I conducted fieldwork in, can't think how many villages, but well over 50 villages in South Yorkshire, the carolers who came from the immediate community would be the largest group. So we're talking about people within a 5-mile radius. In the contemporary situation, the people within the 5-mile radius are actually the smallest group. The radius for carol singing is now extended maybe to 30, 40 miles. And this, I suppose, with transport, with people having the mobility, of course, all these things have changed. Furthermore, some aficionados, and here I include myself, I'm one of these, will regularly attend 3, 4, or in our cases 7, 8, 9 sessions a week. This has meant that the carolling group within a particular venue may actually only exist for that specific function to sing the carols at that particular place. And the shared identity is therefore created through that one thing rather than through being a member of a particular community or some such other reason for people coming together. A few words about the venues. Christmas carolling has been practiced then in pubs over a period of profound social change. And if we talk about particularly the resilience, the vitality and the relevance of the carols, this helps to explain it. But they've had to put up with some pretty rough justice at times, and perhaps the worst thing is the way public houses changed. When they sang in the Peacock in Stannington, they could go into a fairly small room and sing away to their heart's delight, and people in other rooms could do what they wanted. But then they altered the pubs, they knocked down the walls, they made them into one big area where if one group wanted to sing, it would upset another group. And this of course, saw the death of many carolling sessions, and it was compounded when pubs became restaurants. Restaurants in all but name, still called pubs, but family restaurants as well. And that, of course, works against people having a carolling session. And then, of course, the ultimate American experience, where you try to get more screens into a room showing sport than you can even get wallpaper on the walls. And this has happened in some pubs as well. So all these things have meant that the choice and the number of pubs has been significantly reduced. A few words about communications. Well, carols were certainly communicated by oral tradition. I'm not going to get too diverted, but all those people after the Napoleonic Wars on the move, moving around, people, evangelists taking with them their hymns, people copying down meticulously carol words in notebooks, people copying down in manuscripts. So there was a long tradition of writing these things go down. And it was compounded, of course, by print. And in the Sheffield area, we're talking about post-1880, as I mentioned. And then recordings. The earliest recording I have of the carols is from the 1960s. But in the 1970s, there were several recordings. And subsequently, there have been countless ones, and I am told that there is a very good CD called English Village Carolling, which you can actually take downloads of from the Smithsonian. So there's a thing. So all these things and the internet, you can go on the internet now and you can find out where the carolling is every night. You don't have to talk to people and work it all out and conduct field work. You can just click with a mouse and there it all is, what's on tonight, where to go, where to sing the carols, and not just in the pubs but in other places as well. And then you can go onto another website and there's the words of all the carols there, and what those websites don't always take account of is the fact that the words obviously vary from place to place. But there's all these supporting things which help people fast track and become conversant with the carols and familiar with them. And then there are people now who literally do come for carolling weeks, carolling fortnights, carolling weekends, and they will stay in the area and they will literally go to all the different places to sing the carols. A week or two ago we had an American who'd come over, and this was his dream holiday, literally to go around to all the different carolling sessions. Another development over the past 20 years has been in choral singing. Now, I've said a few things about choral singing. For those of you who sing in choirs, I've tried not to be too rude. I understand your sensitivities, so I've tried to be polite. But there has been, in the UK, a burgeoning of choirs, and these choirs go by various names. Some of them are called folk choirs. Hence, they sing folk songs. They sing folk songs from South Africa, folk songs from Hawaii, folk songs from Norway. But then they sing them a cappella often. And then there are natural voice choirs where people just sing in their ordinary, as it were, speaking voices. They're not auditioned or anything, and so on. And then there's another group of choirs who are often referred to as West Gallery music choirs, and they sing in the style of that period that I was talking about earlier, 1760 to 1820, a period when there was this extraordinary burgeoning of hymnody and psalmody and anthems and so on. And all of those groups somehow love our carols and have been learning our carols, and they have contributed to the carol singing. You can go to a session and you can often see these people not in the middle, not in the centre, not taking the limelight, but, listening, learning the carols at first hand by oral tradition, and then taking them back and performing them and teaching them to their groups. And this has got to the point where, in fact, there are several groups in the US and Canada where you can hear this sort of carol singing. Ottawa Valley is one area, for example, but I know of other ones as well. And that's not to belittle one particular area, which is Glen Rock, York County, Pennsylvania, where they took the carols back and kept them going, not in the 1960s, 70s and 80s, but in the 1830s and 40s. And that's where I go on Thursday, to Glen Rock, Pennsylvania, because of our joint interest in these wonderful old carols. And now a brief conclusion before, we could have just our last carol. This is a festival. This is from a festival for which I take a large part of the blame. And it's a festival where all these constituencies can come together, whether they're choral singers, whether they're people who love to sing in the pub, whether the people who love to sing but actually don't like going into pubs. We have all these sort of groups coming to this biennial festival, up to 400 people, maybe 50 of them being instrumentalists, singing away. This was the very first one in 1994, and the carol is Merry Christmas. Some of you may have heard a carol, Give Us Some Figgy Pudding. It doesn't taste very nice, so just forget it. But anyway, it's a version of that same set of carols. We wish you a Merry Christmas. Introduction. There are actually only 3 parts being played here, but they're being played by all manner of instruments, whoever turned up with whatever they brought. Whether it was a banjo, I kid you not, a concertina, a sackbut, a serpent. They were, fiddles, lots of fiddles. And into the symphony. When we get back into the voice parts, just listen to the instruments for a little while and notice they are not replicating what people are singing. They're playing something else. Ta 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 tam. Da 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 da. And we'll leave it there, and we'll leave it with that particular photograph, the photograph of the group known as the Big Set, because it's because of them that we have this extraordinary music. Most of groups of musicians like this played in that sort of style. The musicians that Thomas Hardy describes in Puddletown, they played in that style, but they didn't annotate, they didn't write down the way they were doing it, because you did it, that was the way you did it. So they wrote the bare bones down in their manuscript. But this lot, the Big Set, put in all the extra bits. They put in all the decorations, they put in all the arpeggios, they put in all the basing and the runs and everything. It's all there in these 3 parts in their manuscript. And if we look at the photograph, we can see the cellist, who is the man, I believe, who was behind all this. His name is William Mount. We can see a fiddler's at his side. The young fiddler is the grandfather of the singer we heard singing the Christmas Tree a little while ago, the younger one on the front row. And we can see a double bass there. It's a double bass that's been in the wash, though. It's a bit shrunk, but it's nonetheless a double bass. And then the various singers, no women there, but boys. Can you see the 2 boys in the middle? They would sing the high alto counterpart, those boys would. And they're outside the Cock Inn at Oughtibridge. So you can see that already there is a sort of drawing in this photograph of the music into the pubs. In this lecture, I've presented a case study of a multi-part singing phenomenon, which indicates the complexity of its development and the intricate nature of its practice. I've attempted to concisely exemplify its form, performance, particular qualities, and social milieu, with reference to a specific region of England. It's through such studies that we can understand the effects of secularisation, institutionalisation, acculturation and revitalisation. And I've referred to the impact of the multimedia and of social, musical and religious changes in the makeup of the tradition. Needless to say, there are of course several other significant issues with which I have not engaged here. My own attraction to this field of research has been substantial and enduring. I warm to the tradition's non-elitist grassroots background. I relish its inclusivity and its participatory nature. I relate to its musicality and its secularity, and I'm excited by the extent to which it has existed as a subculture largely hidden from mainstream art music, folk music, and sacred singing. Thank you.
Would you take a few questions?
Yeah, sure. The question is about shape notes singing and the interchange and the connectedness. Yeah, there was a lot of movement. What I don't have, Alan, is I don't have particular day, month, year records, because I'm not somebody who believes that these Christmas carols moved around of their own volition, nor am I of the opinion that, that the movement itself was about the music. The movement was about people, and where you can find out particular people and how they moved and where the provenance of these things occurred, I can give you some for instances. So we have a carol in Fulo that has come from Jeremiah and Ingalls from New Hampshire, to come across from west to east, as it were. And then we have another carol, Come All Ye Weary Travellers, that actually crossed the Atlantic as part of a small hymn book for slaves to sing on the part of the slave trade. So you've got various bits and pieces. What I don't have is how did this one get here all the time, because those sort of records have sort of slipped away. But I'm sure there are these records, and I'm sure some of them are still to be found. Yes, definitely.
Maybe one more question?
Yeah, how many you like, Nancy?
Jennifer?
Okay.
I love your use of the word hidden, and I ran into a term in James Madison Carpenter collection. As you will know, as Elphinstone is the home of the UK James Madison Carpenter research team. Carpenter in the early 30s collected a lot of carols in the West Country, and in particular Somerset and Cornwall, as you will know. I ran into a term in one of Carpenter's manuscripts. He collected a carol called Satan Saw His Power Was Gone, from a man called Robert Lawrence. And the man said that he had learned this carol from his father, and that they had been singing it for 60 years at events called Christmasings, but that they had never once sung this in church. And I wondered if you had ever run into this term Christmasings in your study.
How do you spell it, Jennifer?
They doubled the S on the end of Christmasing. So it's Christmas, S-I-N-G-S. And I wondered if it was Carpenter not leaving a space between Christmas sings, or whether there was an actual term called Christmasings.
I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's probably the way it was said, and I'm probably sure that the people who said it to Carpenter considered it to be one word. It's not a term that we use, but even within our area we get different terms. For example, the Bann near to Holmfirth and in the Huddersfield area, they talk about bands of carolers, bands. And by the term bands, they don't mean instrumentalists. They could be all singers. And so the term there is the norm, bands. We talk about going for a carol sing. And similarly, we probably wouldn't spell it as one word, but we would certainly say it as one word. So Christmas sing, carol sing. Yeah, it's usually carol sings with us.
Do you think that they would have occurred in homes or in pubs?
There is certainly plenty of singing that was done at home. And unfortunately, there's no way we can find out except by speaking to older people and also checking back through people's notes just how much of this happened. But if I can tell you from the field work that I did near Sheffield, the usual pattern was that maybe they would, one particular family, the White family, they would sing, the men would go to the pub and have a sing-song on the Saturday night, but in the Sunday, they would gather round and they would sing hymns. But as soon as it was at that magic point where I mentioned the 11th of November, the repertoire would move away from hymns to carols, and that would stay around, and they would sing them in the home with all the family members. Maybe one of them was a pianist, maybe one of them was a fiddler, and that would be the format with the White family. And I've heard several families talk about stopping outside other people's homes where they similarly had Sunday night sings and eavesdropping, as it were.
Well, we're running a little bit late, but I want to thank Ian Russell for coming and for giving a great lecture, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.